Okay, this is my makeup video for Huckleberry Finn for the Socratic seminar that I missed. I first wanted to touch base on the point that the main protagonist is like a boy, and then I would say the second main character is a slave. And I think if you just compare those two words, like a boy and a slave, there's not much that you think would go together, but I think that they're more alike than we seem, because first of all, as a child, you don't have any rights, and as a slave you don't have any rights. And we see that when Miss Watson, she's always on top of him, and in the very first chapter on page 14, it says, don't put your feet up there, Huckleberry. Don't scrunch up like that, Huckleberry. Sit up straight. And pretty soon she would say, don't grab and stretch like that, Huckleberry. Why don't you try to behave? So just kind of that example just shows all the demands, you have to do this and this and this and this and this. And as we know from history, slavery was the same way. You have to do this, this, and this and this, and you never get a break. And although Huck, does get to have fun with his friends, just that comparison kind of goes along. Also, I think it shows, what was I gonna say? Oh, they're both abused is another thing. Huck's dad is always abusing him, and then Jim's obviously a slave, and we all know that slaves are not treated very good. So, we can infer that Jim also gets abused. Another thing, it shows their immaturity, but their curiosity and their uneducation, because Huck does get an education and Jim doesn't at all, but Huck still, he's a 13-year-old boy, so even though he might be learning things, he has so much to learn about life still that he doesn't have. And I think Mark Twain, when he says in, let's see what chapter 4, when he was talking about the hairball, he said Jim tried it again and then another time, and it just acted the same. Jim got down on his knees and put his ear against it and listened. So he's trying to listen to a hairball, thinking a hairball's gonna it just kind of shows that that's kind of not that's kind of dumb. So kind of shows the immaturity in that, and the uneducatedness that that the that society gave to the slaves. Sorry for the background noise. I also think that Mark Twain, he used the dialect in the story, even though it's not huge fancy words and some amazing I don't know, fancy words and hard to read stuff. It makes you feel you're actually part of the story. It makes you more emotionally attached to the characters in the books. And I think he did a beautiful job illustrating that. I think that's something that's probably really hard to do, is to really get the reader 100% in. They're not just flipping through the pages. They want to flip through the pages. They want to know what's happening next. And it makes it really exciting because there's all this suspense and all of this dramaticness that happens through it. Let me find the quote I had for that. I know I had one, but I think, yeah, anyway, I don't know where it went, but, I think that was a really, pivotal moment, I guess, for the reader, is how he uses that language, and it helps us get into mindset of what's happening. Even though we some people try to erase history, Twain establishes that you can't just erase something. We have to know what happened. We have to know what was going on in that time, and it shows the vulnerability that each character has to have. It's almost as like I said earlier, we're living in the moment. I think the next point I would like to make is the river. The river is symbolizes the whole like journey that Huck has, like how he starts off as this little boy, and then he is in his mind, he's like, his choice on slavery is free in his mind. And like that, going back to the first point I made about Jim and Huck being comparison, I think that also goes along with it. Like Jim is trying to be like free from people, and Huck is trying to be free from like society choosing what he believes in, and at the end they both achieve that. But going back to the river, I think that like Huck and Jim, they're always on the river. They're always on this like constant move, and like sometimes they stop and other times they just keep going. And I think that's kind of like, I think Mark Twain's trying to illustrate that their journey is like that. It's always, kind of bumpy, but at sometimes it like slows down, and sometimes it even stops when you get to certain points and you're in dilemmas and debacles, and like in the middle of the river, so the river itself is like a journey, and then in the middle of the river, they're conflicted with the Duke and the King, and they Huck and Jim are trying to figure out what to do with that because they know what they're doing is wrong, but they wanted to, and then Huck leaves the money. So that's like the climax of the story, right then. And the river, just everything takes place on this river, and like, what was I saying? Yeah, and like every time they're like on the river, nothing too terribly bad happens, like nothing awfully bad happens on the river. But as soon as they get off the river and off this like motion of life, and they like get off the path that they're going on, something bad always happens every time. And I think Twain also is trying to symbolize that like the river is their life. Like you're supposed to follow this path, follow what's happening and going on. And yeah, so I think Twain, his purpose is just to not forget, but remember what happened in the past, and like wanting us to like be a part of the story. And I think that through the whole novel, he did that exceedingly well. I don't think there was ever a point where I was bored in the story, because he always kept me on my toes, and it was always suspenseful, and there was humor and comedy, and that's the same thing. And there's just a bunch of amazing stuff happening in this place. So thank you.